Well, thank you all for coming. My talk today is about megalithic sites around the world, but focusing on megalithic sites where megalithic just means big stone. So what I'm focusing on is megalithic sites where we see evidence of obvious, very advanced technology, which would be impossible to have existed during either the dynastic Egyptian times or the Inca times or the Aztec times or the Roman times. So all of my study culminated in this book because we're also going to see very obvious evidence of an ancient cataclysm or series of cataclysms that occurred between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. It's called the Younger Dryas. It's a very specific time period. So there were asteroids that probably hit the Earth, massive earthquakes, sea level rise of 350 to 400 feet. In one instance, there was a 100-foot sea level rise globally in the course of about 2 weeks. So it wasn't like a gradual melting of the poles. It's like massive. Also, the axis of the Earth was probably shifted because it looks like we've had 5 different North Poles in the last 200,000 years as the result of catastrophic events. So this culminated in this book, Aftershock, and other books that I've written on this subject. Lost Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia, Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, Lost Technology of Peru and Bolivia, Volume 2, Egypt, Volume 2. There's also evidence in Mexico, which most people don't understand, but there's evidence in Mexico of constructions that are much older than the Olmec or the Aztec or the Toltec or anybody. But all of these were inheritances from very advanced cultures that existed, probably 13,000 plus years ago, which is twice as old as what mainstream designates as civilization. Because they talk about the Indus Valley or China or dynastic Egypt, but it's obvious that there were very advanced, either human or I would speculate possibly extraterrestrial cultures that existed in a very distant past, responsible for incredible constructions that were later adopted and adapted by the cultures we know of. And a very special place, Pumapunku in Bolivia. And Lebanon, that's what's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, 1,200 tons, still in the quarry. So we're going to start in Peru, and then we're going to go to Bolivia, then we're going to Egypt, and then little bits of Lebanon, a bit of Japan, and Easter Island. So here, you see this is Machu Picchu, and that's the correct pronunciation. Most people call it Machu Picchu, but when you say Machu Picchu, that means ancient penis in the Inca language. Machu Picchu means ancient mountain. So whenever I would say Machu Picchu to the old ladies who lived in that local town, they'd start laughing at me. I love your ancient penis. So you can see the bottom part of the construction is much more precise than the top part, or top half. So it is possible that this is an example of a megalithic construction, the lower part that was found by the Inca, and then they built the relatively cruder work on top. And this is much more obvious. This is also at Machu Picchu. You can see clearly reconstruction on the top layer. And there has been no modern day reconstruction at this location. So this is how the Inca rebuilt this structure. You see the very large stones at the bottom and smaller ones on top. Clearly 2 different cultures. And also you see the gaps in the stone. That was the result of an ancient earthquake that pulled all of the structures east to west apart by the same amount, about 2 inches. Then, of course, we know of flood stories. There are more than 200 ancient cultures and modern day cultures that talk about an ancient cataclysm or destruction that destroyed the world as they knew it or understood it. So that could be an island, that could be a much larger landmass. Also, we see evidence that asteroids entered our solar system and wreaked havoc, again, during this time frame of 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. And this is one theory that Graham Hancock is a big proponent of, that it was an asteroid that caused all the destruction. Then we have this guy called Plato. And of course, he spoke about the ancient site of Atlantis, most likely referring to the city, not necessarily a continent that sunk. But if you imagine if the sea level rose by 400 feet, it's not that the continent or island sank, it's that the waters rose up and therefore destroyed the city or whatever it was. And that would have been global. So almost every advanced culture we know of lives by the ocean to some degree. So if you were alive 13,000 years ago and these events started to happen, hopefully you would have enough time to be able to escape. But if you didn't, then your world as you knew it would disappear. Also curious that in the same time frame, 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, all of the megafauna of North America, like the mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the mastodons, etc., all disappeared in the period of 1,000 years. So it wasn't a gradual thing. Okay, so this is where the axis of the Earth is now, 23.5 degrees off vertical. In a perfect universe or perfect galaxy, our planet would be upright. It wouldn't have a tilt like that. So the question is, what caused that? I think it was something coming and causing destabilization. Because also Venus, I think, is rotating backwards, and Uranus is rotating sideways on its side. So something obviously came in from outside of our solar system and wreaked havoc, causing destabilization. Also, the asteroid belt was probably a planet that was destroyed by a direct impact of some kind. So again, all the megafauna, they disappear in the course of 1,000 years, and it could not have been rather diminutive Native American people wiping them all out in 1,000 years, because there were millions of megafauna, and there weren't that many Native Americans at that time. There were some, but not that many at that time. Also, another theory by Allen and Dallaire called Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC, which is the same time that Plato talks about the disappearance of Atlantis. Their theory, again, is that there was a major series of events that came into our solar system wreaking havoc. And this was followed up by a lady called Barbara Hand Clow, who also learned from her Cherokee grandfather of oral tradition of major destruction happening to our planet over and over and over again, as far back as they can remember. And she came up with a theory of catastrophobia, that the reason why human beings hid underground was because they experienced this series of events and escaped as best they could in caves or underground because they thought it would come again. And it took 5,000 years for them to move out of the caves and other subterranean areas and start to rebuild again. So that's why she called it catastrophobia. A recurring cycle of destruction every 13,000 years. So we're due to one pretty damn soon, not within our lifetimes. Also, Dr. Paul Laviolette, who's a brilliant American physicist, believes that the center of our galaxy is a black hole, but he thinks that every 13,000 years the black hole fills up with energy and can't take any more and has to release it. and that would be spread across the galactic plane, would enter our solar system, and again, wreak havoc with things like gamma rays. And his theory is called the superwave, which you can look up on the internet. Also, Dr. Robert Schoch, which many of you will have heard of. He also believes that there's a cycle of destruction every 13,000 years, but he believes it's solar pulses or solar outbursts from our sun. And there was an event that happened about 5 years ago where there was a solar outburst big enough to have hit the Earth, but lucky for us, it was going in the opposite direction, the other side of the sun. So that's his theory. So I went through all of these theories and came up with, I picked the best parts I thought were logical out of all the theories and put them all together. And I think there are aspects of each one of those theories which are valid. So there we have what some believe was actually the lost continent of Lemuria or Mu in the Pacific, no, sorry, that's Atlantis. Some think in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but there's no evidence of that much of a disruption of a large landmass disappearing. So this is the kind of precision I'm talking about. This is a site called the Coricancha in Cusco in Peru. And it's a megalithic site that the Inca could not have built because look at the level of precision. You can't fit a human hair in those joints. So that is technically perfect. And the Inca were a Bronze Age culture. That is called andesite. It's a much harder stone. So you can't shape andesite with bronze or copper. You have to have some level of technology. And another site, this is called Rachi. And when we have a close-up look of this one, you see the top part, the top 4/5 is all adobe clay brick, but the bottom part is all polygonal or multi-sided hard stone. So it's clear that the Inca arrived, they discovered this, and then they built that on top, because that's a material they were acquainted with, adobe. Another site, this will get more, as I go through the slides, it'll get more and more obvious. I won't even have to tell you much because you'll see what's going on. Here you can see with the lovely princess from Bahrain. On the right-hand side, you see obviously relatively rough construction work. That is Inca. On the left-hand side, you see megalithic blocks. And so the megalithic was discovered by the Inca, and so they decided to expand the site, which all the cultures did. Like when the dynastic Egyptians showed up, they found ruined sites, they rededicated them, they repurposed them, they rebuilt them, but they could not match the level of technology, so they did as best as they could with whatever materials were at hand. And here, again, this is also the site called the Coricancha. So you see the right-hand side is perfect. That is the original megalithic. And then on the lower left-hand side, you see where the Inca found some of the broken stones and put them back into place as best they could. But then they ran out of that material and found local stone to build the next section. And then the white section above that is colonial Spanish. And this is the first topographical map of the city of Cusco, which was made when the Spanish showed up about 1532. And you see thick walls, you see thin walls. The thick walls are what are left of the megalithic site of Cusco. The thinner walls are the expansion done by the Inca. The megalithic walls average 2 feet thick. The Inca walls average 1 foot thick, and they're hollow on the inside, or like filler. So what the Inca tried to do is they tried to match what the megalithic stuff looked like, but they didn't have to bother making it perfect from the front to the back, because they couldn't, so they just used rough material to fill in the center part. So this is another megalithic aspect in Cusco. Again, it's polygonal. Every stone is a different shape and size. That is not a logical way to build a wall, because what we would do is have a unit like a brick. So if you wanted a 100-foot long wall, you would use 100 bricks that are a foot long and put them together. But for some reason, whoever did this work were such masters at stonework, they decided to make every stone a different shape and size. That does make it earthquake-proof, but that wasn't the original function. I think the original function of the megalithic sites was to resonate to a specific frequency, like we were talking about earlier at the Serapeum, that the whole building was supposed to move harmoniously, as if it was one piece of stone. When the Inca showed up, they didn't understand the concept, so they didn't bother. And when the Spanish showed up, they of course didn't bother. So here's another example of an Inca repair. You see the megalithic on the bottom, and then filler in the upper middle, and then more filler on top, because they didn't understand the concept of resonance. So this is what like I was saying, this is what the Inca did. The very front edges fit perfectly tightly, but as you go farther back, it didn't matter. So that's why the stones or the gap starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because they just wanted it to look like the megalithic. They didn't know how to make it function like the megalithic. And this site is called Sacsayhuama or Sacsayhuaman. It's the largest megalithic wall in the world. It's about 400 feet long. And you see the huge stones, and then in the upper right, you see the rough repair work. That is repair done by the Inca. And then curiously, on the upper left, you see that shape. That's called the Puma paw. So whoever the builders were, they wanted to incorporate animal designs into their construction. So there you see the fist part of the puma and the 4 toes. That's not chance, because there's also a fish, there's a snake, there's a hummingbird, there's a llama, and different animals were built into the megalithic construction. So to me, that would lend more to a human type of construction, because humans have a tendency to be closely associated with wildlife, whereas if it was aliens, I don't think the aliens would really give a damn and just, wouldn't incorporate something organic like that. And then this is an example of the finest Inca construction in the Sacred Valley of Peru. This was a royal king's house, or his palace. So if the Inca knew how to do megalithic, they would not have used all mud brick construction like this is. Then we have another site called Ollantaytambo. This is a Inca construction. It's a giant warehouse 1,000 feet off the valley floor, and it was used for storing food. So it's relatively rough construction, but the front and the back of the buildings were left open. It did have a thatched roof, but the left and right sides were left open so that the air would move through to air dry potatoes and other plants that they were processing. This, on the other hand, is across the valley, and those 6 stones in a row, the largest one weighs 68 tons, and the location of the quarry, if you look on the very left-hand side, you see that mountaintop. The quarry is at the very top of that mountain. So how would the Inca be capable of moving a 68, or when rough, maybe 100-ton block down the side of the valley, across a river, and up the hill, and interlock them like this? Clearly, they inherited that. Just like this, obviously. You see the big stones were repositioned by the Inca as best they could, but then they used local filler stone on top of that to complete the reconstruction of the wall. And then back again at the famous Machu Picchu. Of course, people look at the mountain in the back, they see the shape of a human face looking upward. That's what's called a simulacra. It's a natural feature that looks like it was deliberately done, but it's, a huge, huge site. And this is one of the best buildings called the Temple of the Sun. Again, you see super tight fitting blocks of stone, but the upper 2 rows were repairs done by the Inca. So this is a megalithic site that was inherited by the Inca. So some people say, how was Machu Picchu built? The Inca found it and rebuilt it. And here again, that example I showed earlier should be becoming more obvious to you now what I'm describing to you of an inheritance of master builders. Then we have this three-sided building at Machu Picchu, and the right-hand side has sunken into the ground by 2 feet. So if that had happened during Inca times, it would have been recorded, but clearly this was an inheritance of the Inca from a megalithic culture that preceded them, and they couldn't repair the damage done. Another site called Sayhuite, that giant block with those kids on top of it, snapped into 2 pieces like it was styrofoam. What size of an earthquake would that take? Now we're in Bolivia. This is Tiwanaku, which some of you may have been to or at least heard of. This was completely rebuilt in the 1980s based on nothing. The archaeologists in Bolivia decided that it had to be restored, and so they tore a bunch of buildings apart and made it look like that with no reference whatsoever to anything. And UNESCO gave them a major kick in the face because they did that, because if you do any major work at an ancient UNESCO site, you have to ask permission. They didn't ask permission. They just went ahead and decided to fill this in. But you see those two big blocks in the doorway, those are original. And the weird thing about it is the weathering pattern on the front is scooped in as if water was at one time at that level and was lapping on the shore there. And 12,000 years ago, the lake level of Lake Titicaca, which is 7 miles away, was 100 feet higher. So at that time, say 13,000 years ago, the lake level would have been right there at the bottom step. And there are 2 types of stone you find at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. One is called andesite, which is a very hard stone, as hard as granite, and it's found on top of a volcano 45 miles to the northeast of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. And then the other stone is red sandstone, and it's from a quarry 8 miles to the west. But some of the blocks that are still at Pumapunku weigh 130 tons. So how would you move a 130-ton block of stone from a quarry over a set of mountains 8 miles away? This is above the tree line. There are no trees to use as log rollers. So again, this is an inheritance. And Pumapunku shows obvious signs that it was decimated by a massive earthquake of some kind, and probably a tsunami from the lake during the Younger Dryas period. This is the deepest of excavations they've done at Pumapunku. They've gone down 2.5 feet, and they've exposed some rather big blocks. And so when you ask them, why don't you dig deeper? They say there's nothing there. Well, recently they did ground penetrating radar, and they found out that there's more than twice the amount of stone above ground is below ground at Pumapunku. But the government refuses to excavate because it's culturally sensitive, because they insist that their ancestors built Pumapunku, but they inherited Pumapunku and Tiwanaku. So you find that everywhere. You say, oh, wow, what a major discovery. Why don't you excavate? Oh, no, we can't do that. It might piss off, this person or that. Like the same in Egypt. Egypt slowly opens up. It's the only progressive country in the world that does that. It's slowly opening up to allow access to places that before you were not allowed. So underneath the step pyramid, that's only been allowed for the last 4 years, because they've been rebuilding it for like 12 years or something. There's another site called the Osiris Shaft, which you should come back to see. It's 150 feet into the bedrock underground at Giza. 3 levels of building in the bedrock. So that's been open for about 4 years, I think. So we see that there is evidence that there could have been a massive tsunami at Pumapunku that buried the site completely, a wall of mud from Lake Titicaca. And this is how precise the stone is. That's a 2-foot level. You put the 2-foot level on the stone, there is no movement. It fits perfectly there. That is as flat as a sheet of glass. And this, again, the Tiwanaku people who inherited the site, they again were a Bronze Age culture. So they found this, they didn't make it. And this is some more of the precision you see at Pumapunku. We actually don't have the technology today to achieve some of the cutting that was done at Pumapunku. It's beyond our level of technology. We don't have cutting machines that can go in and do precise 90-degree angles like that. Also, there are magnetic anomalies at Pumapunku. You take a compass and you slide it into one of the what's called H blocks, which is what that shape is in behind. You slowly move it to the very back. The needle moves by 270 degrees. And then you pull it back out and it moves back to where it's supposed to be. So that's an anomaly in the andesite stone itself. It probably contains a type of magnetite. And that is the famous Sungate. That's 11 tons. How would you move an 11-ton block of stone 45 miles from the northeast after you brought it down from the top of a mountainside? And the crack you see is original. That's how the Tiwanaku people found it, broken in two, lying flat down on its face. Then they raised it back up, then it fell down again, then the Spanish arrived, and they raised it back up. So that's how the Spanish found it, broken, or rebroken. And these are the tools that archaeologists insist did all of this work, copper and bronze chisels. Impossible. And also, they've only found maybe 50 or maximum 100 of these chisels. How many would it take to do one of these major constructions, which the copper or bronze couldn't shape anyway? Now we're in Egypt. So this is in front of the Cairo Museum. The box on the right is a sarcophagus. It's human-sized. You can see how rough it is, and you can see the hieroglyphics on it. The box on the left, they admit, is much older. And you can see it's much bigger. It's more or less the size of the Serapeum boxes. There are quite a few examples of giant boxes like this that you find not only at the Serapeum, but in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens and other locations too. Also Tanis, which is in the north of Egypt. So they admit the one on the left is older, but it's much more precise than the one on the right. One on the right literally looks like someone took some stone hammers and pounded away at it to shape it, which is what they did. And this is an example of how we see the machinery at work. Because this was going to be one of these giant boxes, but what happened was there were two circular saws running, one on top, one below, about 6 feet in diameter, and there was a guideline you can see for the saw to run, but it went off course and started to move to the right. That would have caused a major vibration to start. It broke the top of the lid off, and so whoever these ancient builders were, they just abandoned it. They didn't try to cut it into pieces and recycle it like someone like the Romans would do. They just went, oh well, get another block. So you're talking superhuman feats of quarrying and cutting. That's in the Cairo Museum, but they have it in a very dark corner because they don't want you to look at it or inspect it. Maybe they've moved it to the gem, I'm not sure. But there you see the actual, those are the saw marks. That is a powered saw. That is not a hand saw. And again, 6 feet in diameter and about 3/16 of an inch thick. You know, if this was diamond level technology, we don't have saws 6 feet in diameter, that narrow. They're much bigger because they have to have diamonds on the front, diamonds on both sides to do the actual cutting of the stone. So this is beyond, I think this is beyond human technology, or human technology as we know it today. Then the famous schist disc, which is actually called metasediment. It's not schist, but it's a very, very hard stone. Now this was found around where the step pyramid is. You can see that it was repaired very badly by the staff at the Cairo Museum, but originally it would have been perfectly circular with those 3 straight blades on it. That's a profile view of it. Now, some people think that it would spin and it would move either air or water, but for that to happen, those 3 blades would have to have an angle to them. They have to either push or pull, but they're not doing that. So maybe it was some speculate it was an energetic device. That's what Abdel Hakim Al-Rian believed. It was an energetic device, maybe responsible for levitation. But recently it's been taken out of it was on display in the Cairo Museum for years. Now it's been moved. It's not there anymore, I've heard. And it's possible that they have many examples of this, but only one on display, and they call it a flower vase. So they have to have an answer to every question, no matter how dumb it is. And the same thing about the cutting of the granite with bronze chisels. You ask the archaeologists a question, how did they do that with bronze chisels? And their answer literally was, they would take one of the chisels, hit the granite with it, hope that a piece would break off, and because that one strike would make the chisel bend, you'd have to have another one and another one. So they would have 1,000 people lined up sharpening the chisels. That's literally their explanation. So now we're into some of these very mysterious vases, dishes, and things made out of very, very hard material like porphyry, basalt, and diorite. And the archaeologists, that's their label. They say archaic period. Archaic means pre-dynastic. So it's likely that what you're going to see are 12,000, 15,000 years old. They were found, they were coveted because they're so perfectly well made, and then they were utilized, and then they were buried under the step pyramid. They found more than 40,000 of them broken, some intact, but mainly broken. So these are some of them. Again, diamond is 10, bronze is 3.5. These are 7 or 8 in terms of hardness. And they had to have been done with some kind of machine. You can't hand make something like that, especially 40,000 of them. So clear evidence of ancient machining technology. So like that one, for example. Then we also find examples of core drilling. That's in the Cairo Museum. So those are hollow drills that go into the stone to take out a center section. And again, almost countless examples of core drills, which those of you going on the tour will see at Karnak. That's where there are more than at any other place. But again, the material of the tool has to be harder than the material of what you're shaping. So that would have to be minimum diamond level technology, if not beyond. Then of course, everyone knows what this is. But did you know it has 8 sides? It can only be seen 2 days of the year. But that, the pyramid itself is almost 500 feet tall, 2.3 million blocks of stone, each one a different shape and size, like what we find in Peru. Again, a very illogical way to build things, but they were such masters that they decided to do that way. But you also have this this crease in the center on all 4 sides. So it's an 8-sided pyramid. That makes it even more complicated to construct than if it was flat. And that is what's left of some of the casing stone of the Great Pyramid. Another point is the Great Pyramid doesn't sit on the Giza Plateau, it's locked into the Giza Plateau. It locks itself into the bedrock. Probably, again, that was a resonance vibrational characteristic, because there are some who believe that it was an ancient machine for harnessing energy, not necessarily electricity, but it was a focusing instrument that collected energy. And then I think what happened with the energy is the energy was then projected outwards and went to the obelisks, because the obelisks are one single solid piece of granite. That makes them a clear resonating structure. Because there's one which they've roped off now, a section of one at Karnak, where you go up to it and you pound up. You can't do it anymore, but you pound on it. Bong! Like it rings like a bell. And the obelisks would ring like bells. So I think they were the receiving station, and the Great Pyramid was the transmitter. Also, we talk about what's underneath the Giza Plateau. There are hundreds and hundreds of locked doorways and shafts done by the Ministry of Antiquities. Some of you may have seen the latest thing on the internet about supposed massive structures underneath the Giza Plateau, which is most likely complete and utter nonsense, because the technology they used cannot penetrate stone, especially not, they claim, 2 kilometers underground. There is no technology to do that. So all this stuff is locked up, and slowly they're beginning to open them up for curious people like us to look at. So here again, this is the Giza Plateau. This is out of bounds. And you can see the site is like riddled with shafts and tunnels and chambers and all sorts of things. It's likely that the tombs that you find on the Giza Plateau were found by the dynastic people and used as tombs. That's also why you don't find any bodies in the Great Pyramids, because almost everyone was buried in these underground tunnels and shafts that were already there when the dynastic people arrived 5,000 years ago. Why build something if it's already there? This is another one. This is out of bounds as well. But you see how big or how wide that shaft is. That's about 15 to 20 feet wide. And right now it goes down about 50 feet. But originally it probably went down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet, connecting with tunnels. The reason why it only goes down 60 feet is because it's full of sand from thousands of years of the winds blowing the sand into these massive shafts. But there are lots of these too. There you see clear evidence of machining technology in basalt stone. This is also at the Giza Plateau, outside the Great Pyramid. But that's a horizontal saw. The cutting, what Chris Dunn calls the feed rate, which is the speed, or not the speed, but the rate of cutting into the material, is about 2 millimeters per revolution. That is 500 times more efficient than a modern saw that we have. So that's advanced, lost, ancient technology. And then just a view inside the Great Pyramid, which we're going to see. We get access to all three we get to see the Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, and those who want to. The subterranean, which is very dirty, but if you want to do it, it's worth doing it once. So these are the obelisks. And again, I think they're resonant structures, receiving stations for the energy. Most of the hieroglyphics were done during dynastic times, but the dynastic people would have found these. They didn't make them. They're granite. The biggest one, I think now, is at Luxor. It's about 450 tons. And there's one unfinished in Aswan, which would have been 1,200 tons. It's in a pit. How are you supposed to get it out of the pit? 1,200 tons. That's a lot of rope. So now a little view of the Sphinx, which you've already been to. And what you have to realize about the construction of the Sphinx was that it wasn't chipped away at to create the shape. Those are multi-ton blocks cut and moved to create what's called the Sphinx Temple in front. Up to 40 plus tons. And originally, the only thing you saw was that the head itself was actually what's called a yardang. It was a natural formation rising above the Sphinx area. So it was like a natural formation, not in the shape of a head, but that's clearly what it was turned into. And some people think the Sphinx originally represented a jackal. I think it was a lion. Or lioness, to be more specific. So you see all the weathering, which you saw that close up and personal. Obviously, the head has been recut at least once, if not more. And the weathering, because the weathering is minimal on it, so that was done during dynastic times. The weathering on the body is so extensive that repairs began during the time of Khufu or Khafre. So the Sphinx is much, much older than what standard archaeologists tell you. Probably at least 13,000 years old. So that is the weathering that we find. You see the vertical weathering, that is done by rainwater. That is not by wind and sand. Wind and sand is horizontal. This is vertical. That has to be hundreds, if not thousands of years of rainfall. And another curious thing is you see that plank in the center. When we were there one time with an ex-guide we had, I said, why is there a platform in between the paws of the Sphinx? And he said, that's how you get to the chambers underneath it. So they've already done the excavation of what's called the Hall of Records, and then they built that wooden platform on top of it to hide where they were doing their excavating. And also, so if they needed to go back in, they simply take the planks back off and go back down inside again. So the Sphinx is hollow. And that's how we know it's hollow. You saw that. That's near the rump of the Sphinx. That's a block of wood and grate that you can pull out. And there's a ladder inside of that goes down inside the Sphinx. So at least part of the Sphinx is hollow. There probably was a series of tunnels that went from the Sphinx to places like the Osiris Shaft. And maybe even as far as, they speculate as far as Karnak, like hundreds of miles of tunnels done during the megalithic time period. So there you see the opening. Then the bent pyramid. So some people think it's called Sneferu, which was the name of a pharaoh, but I've heard that it's actually Seneferu, which means double harmony. And that's why it's bent, because it was supposed to respond to two different frequencies. All the other pyramids are one angle, but this one has two. The standard explanation is that it was a construction mistake when they were building it. They built half of it and then figured out the angle was wrong. Nobody does that. You would take 2 seconds and make a drawing in the sand and go, what angle do we want for the pyramid? So that was clearly intentional. And I think double harmony, double resonance. That would be functional. Then the red pyramid, there's basically no of the casing stone left, which I think is a mystery. Some people say all the stone was taken to Cairo, but it looks like it's been pulverized. The biggest piece you can find is about that big that's left. So I think it was hit by a massive cataclysm and the surface exploded. And that's inside the Red Pyramid. Well worth it. The resonance is astonishing. It's inside there. Now, well, we saw this. So that, of course, is the Serapeum, one of the unfinished boxes, on its way to its final resting place, but it never made it. And that's the one that some people climbed in today. So again, whoever did the hieroglyphics was not responsible for the manufacturing of the device itself. That was inherited. And that's Stephen Mailer, simply showing like the glossiness of that underside of that lid. It's like glass. There are the crappy hieroglyphs. That's like an 8-year-old with a nail. And that's inside. Again, it responds to Om. And as I also said, the corners are not sharp angles. They're slightly rounded. That helps the energy move around the box. If you have sharp angles, it can't move. It'll move to the other side and stop. You have a slight curve. That allows the energy or the sound to move around it. Okay, this is at Dendera. I think I'll let, that's possibly the oldest zodiac in the world, which Napoleon decided to steal and take to Paris, but they did make a copy. But I'll let Patricia give you a brilliant explanation of how important this astrological map is. Layers and layers and layers of meaning. It just goes on and on and on. And those who are going to go to Abydos, the supposed helicopter, the tank, and the submarine. I still think they look like a helicopter and a tank and a submarine. But I've been given good explanations as to why that's not the case. I think, what's it called, Paul Pisset? Okay, what the standard explanation is that the next pharaoh, when one pharaoh dies, the next pharaoh inherits, especially Ramses II. And what he did is he had his name carved so deeply into the wall that nobody could deface it. So he had his name is everywhere. And so that's the standard explanation, is that he decided that he didn't care about his ancestors or what they had to say. So he said, put my words or my thoughts as deep into the stone as possible so nobody can ever deface it. And the beautiful Osirion. So that's at Abydos as well. Largest blocks here weighing probably 40 to 50 tons. And the stone is either from Aswan or from the Eastern Desert. So you're talking moving massive blocks like that, hundreds of miles, with no wood for rollers. And not by, putting a rope around it and pouring milk in front of it. That's the latest one. The standard Egyptology, put a rope around it, pour some milk in front of it, and pull at it, and that makes it slippery. In sand, I think the milk tends to sink into the sand. So again, it's mind-blowing, a mind-blowing place. Those of us going with us are lucky we have 2 hours there. And I've only been there, they've only opened it up, I think 3 years ago or so, before it was completely prohibited. This is an example of a core drill. That's a hollow core drill, that big, cutting into granite. That's at Karnak. Again, there are hundreds of examples of this at Karnak. This is a strange stone, which I think Susan will probably talk about, that seems to have melted from the inside, because you see it's falling apart. So it seems like it was heated, like superheated, and then started to break down. So the crystal structure on the outside is finer than it is on the inside. So it's been recrystallized. That's also at Karnak. Also, I think at Karnak we're seeing evidence of, again, massive cataclysmic activity. This is going into what's called the Holy of Holies, which is the center of Karnak. And the center of Karnak is all megalithic, all hard stone, all granite, basalt, and stones of that nature. So what's obvious for those going, you'll see the center was found by the dynastic people, and then they built from the center outwards. And they built with limestone and sandstone, which are much softer, much more easy to work with. You can actually work sandstone and limestone with bronze chisels, but you can't with the harder materials. So they found it, they reconstituted it, they rededicated it, they rebuilt it and expanded huge. Also a number of these massive statues that have been found in granite, all dedicated to Ramses II, because as they were excavating during his time, his workers would find, some of these are like 30 feet tall. And so they would find a statue and go to Ramses and say, "Do you want your name on it?" And he said, "Of course." So that's what you see. That is his cartouche. But you see next to it, there's a dagger. The dagger design is not contemporary with the cartouche. So the cartouche was done during Ramses' time. The sculpture is several thousand years older. And they're still digging them out today. They're still finding them buried in the mud. 20 feet tall, 30 feet tall. It's incredible. And this is perfect bilateral symmetry. This was done by Christopher Dunn, and he did a layover of like wax paper, one side to the other side. And they're perfect. Absolutely left hand or left side, right side are perfectly the same. That is not what a human face looks like. All human faces are slightly off on one side or the other, but this is technically perfect. That takes technology. And of course, the Colossi of Memnon, 720 tons, one piece of stone brought from Cairo, which is 400 miles away. And the front is more damaged than the sides and more damaged from the back. The front is facing the east. So I think what happened, and Susan backs me up on this, is that this was hit by a major pulse of heat from the sun that blew the face off. This is not somebody taking a stone hammer and pounding away at it, trying to damage it. This is something that blew it. And also it's quartzite, which is like a creamy color. You can see shades of purple and red and black. That is heat, like 2,000 degrees Celsius in less than a second. That's probably from the sun. Whoops. Whoops. Plus and minus. Okay, 1,000-ton statue located in the same area of Thebes. So that was a 1,000-ton block of granite. Now it's all broken. Some say it was an earthquake. Maybe. I see irregularities to the surface as if the surface was burnt off the back of it. I think it's a victim of an ancient cataclysm that blew it apart. And then this is in the Valley of the Queens, and I show you just as a reference. There is Patricia. That's one of many of these hallways in the Valley of the Queens and the Valley of the Kings. And just the sheer scale of them, there's no way somebody did this with hand tools. These go on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet. It's only as wide enough for maybe 4 people to be there with axes or something to chip away at the limestone to try to, remove material. But there are miles of this stuff. And supposedly, I went once with Stephen Mailer and other people, and we went underground a couple of 100 feet in the Valley of the Queens. We met up with the guy who's the caretaker, and he said the Valley of the Queens and the Valley of the Kings interlock underground. It's all one system of tunnels. So those were inherited by the dynastic people and used as tombs. You also find giant stone boxes in them as well, blown up. So that is where you enter under the Valley of the Queens. Valley of the Kings is in behind. Okay, Elephantine Island. The telephone booth, which is what I call it. But it's an unfinished, massive block of granite that you just see lying on its side. Possibly this is the location where it was being finished on Little Elephantine Island in Aswan. There's the 1,200-ton unfinished obelisk. How would you get that out of the pit? How would you move it on a mountainous or hilly landscape down to the Nile? Nope, they found it. They say Hatshepsut commissioned it. Nope. She probably commissioned one about that big, but not something that's that big. So that's what it looks like inside. What happened was they were cutting down to try to release it from the bedrock, and they found a crack in it on the right side. You see the crack. So they just abandoned it. They didn't cut it into blocks. They just said, oh well, next. And that's another smaller one. You see, it has to be machine scooping for removing that material. That's also at Aswan. It's a little site, or big site, called Tanis in the Nile Delta that looked like a nuclear bomb, like a nuclear bomb, or several, just blew it to pieces. Nothing there is intact. It's just blown to smithereens. And I think what you're seeing here, how much more time do I have? 10 minutes? Okay. So this is interesting. The right-hand side, you see very superficial cutting into the stone. That's a person's head. So that is dynastic cutting into granite. On the left-hand side, where that guy's fingers are, you put your fingers in there and move your fingers up and down. That is machine precision. That is not done by hand. So on the left-hand side, the inherited machined work, right-hand side, dynastic work. And I'm not trying to put the dynastic Egyptians down. I'm just showing you what they could do, what they couldn't do. That's not being mean or cruel to a culture. Spectacular culture. But some things were beyond their capability. Now I don't have to show you any more slides. You know what I'm talking about now. Here too, this is at Tanis, the right-hand side of this sculpture. Again, quartzite, superheated. So the surface was cooked. Parts are blown off. That's a wall that was rebuilt by the dynastic people out of older blocks. That's a piece of quartzite discolored by heat. That's the foot of a statue that would have been one piece of granite, at least 50, if not 100 feet tall. That's all that's left, or bits and pieces. But that was one piece of granite, probably 2,000 plus tons. And this is quartzite too, and it's also at Tanis. Evidence of melting of the stone on the front where you see the toes are. Because if you heat quartzite, it melts. If you heat granite, it blows up. So quartzite, because it's so high in silica or glass content, you heat it, it melts. There again, that's quartzite, discolored and melted. And more quartzite. Okay, so the final thing I can show you is the Osiris shaft, which you have to see at one time in your life. There's the Great Pyramid in the back. This is the entrance. You go in here, and then this is level number 1. You go down, or that's looking down from the first level down up to the grate. So you go down a ladder about 30 feet. There. That's an example of someone coming down. And you enter this room. So this is what's under the Giza Plateau, not high-tech precision stuff that you saw on the internet over the last week. It's rough, but it's incredible volume of removal. So this is level 1. Then you go down another ladder, I think about 50 feet. and you enter the second level, which has these two sarcophagi that look like they exploded from the inside. They're so strangely damaged. And then this is one of the boxes that's there. It's a material called dacite, which supposedly you can't find in Egypt. It might come from Turkey. That's the inside. And then that's the final level going down to where the water table is. So 3 levels, somewhere in the region of, the lowest levels, somewhere in the region of 150 feet deep. Then you hit the water table. And then there are probably tunnels interconnecting, like I said, with the Sphinx and other locations. And that is Patricia's ex-husband on top of a box in the lower level, lowest level. Okay, welcome to Lebanon. That is Mount Hermon in the background, which is found, it's in Lebanon, I think Syria, also Israel. It's where the famous Nephilim supposedly descended to earth in the Bible. And this is the quarry at Baalbek, limestone quarry. Massive stones removed from here. There's one that the Romans found. And the Romans weren't stupid, so they decided to cut blocks out and utilize them. But there's Stephen Mailer and Yusuf on top of that one. That's probably in the region of 1,000 tons, cut from the side of the quarry, fell down, never moved. That's the bigger one, 1,200 tons, still connected to the bedrock. And there's even a bigger one that they've recently uncovered on the other side, 1,600 tons. So that's what the surface looks like. That's me for scale. So the one on the left-hand side is the one that Russians recently excavated, 1,600 tons. And that's the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, which is a bad translation from French. It's supposed to be the foundation stone. And that's what's called the trilithon. That's at the temple itself. So those are 3 stone blocks that lock together, 1,000 tons apiece. And then above that, you have Roman construction, and then above that, you have medieval construction. So at least 3 different phases of building. This is another wall. Those are somewhere in the region of 400 tons apiece. From the quarry, this gives you a sense inside the Baalbek complex. Again, look at the size of the people compared to the blocks. Then you find columns, 300 plus granite columns. The stone came from Egypt. And these columns there are about 3 of them still intact, the other 297 are broken. And this is machining technology, because you're able to actually go up and put your fingers on it. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly round. They had to have been done on a lathe, like spun on a lathe. You're talking very heavy stones. We don't have lathes that big today. Somebody did. That's what's left of the other 297. But it's Baalbek's well worth it. I wouldn't go now because the Israelis are still bombing in that area, but it's well worth it at some point to go and see. It's spectacular. And Petra in Jordan. Okay, I'll talk about Petra for 2 minutes. So Petra, the western surfaces of Petra are all blackened. And it's a red sandstone, so it's a relatively soft material. But The western surfaces, like that's the famous treasury, that's less than 1% of what's at Petra. Petra is 12 kilometers long. And it has chambers. I think that is machining technology on the surfaces. But it has chambers at Petra as big as 300,000 cubic feet. You can't do that by hand. But there are so many of these, it's a huge place. It's well worth 2 or 3 days visiting. Spectacular. There's also a site about half an hour drive away called Little Petra, which is an extension of Petra. So if you ever go to Petra, go to Little Petra too, because it's one massive complex, 7 miles long. And there are so many of these, carved out recessed areas that would have been used as tombs that they even made a bathroom out of 2 of them, or 1 or 2. Okay, I guess I better stop there. Okay, thank you.